I've worked homicide for 19 years, and I've learned something most people do not want to hear. Monsters don't hide under beds, they live in houses with mortgages. They shop at the same grocery store you and I do and wave at their neighbors. Coldwater is a small mountain town in northern Idaho. It's quiet and predictable, the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked and still think crime means a teenager stealing beer. That changed last winter, and I haven't slept right since. The case started on January 14th. It was a Sunday, cold enough that the air felt sharp when you breathed it in. I was at home, halfway through a reheated bowl of chili, when dispatch called. Detective Harlan, we've got a situation at 112 Hollow Point Road. Caller reports screaming, possible domestic. Domestic calls are the ones that get cops killed. You never know what you're walking into. So I grabbed my coat, my badge, and my sidearm, and I headed out. Hollow Point Road is a dead end street on the north side of town. There's old houses, big yards, and lots of trees. The kind of place that retirees go to die quietly. The house at 112 belonged to a man named Elliot Granger. He was 46, divorced, had no kids, worked from home as a technical writer. No priors, no complaints, and no history of violence. But when I pulled up, the front door was wide open. That's never a good sign as a detective. I announced myself as I entered, but there was no response. The house was warm, too warm, like someone had cranked the heat to 90. The living room was spotless though. There was bookshelves lined across the wall, single lamp was on, casting a soft yellow glow across the room. Nothing looked disturbed. But the screaming the neighbor reported, I could still feel it in the air, like the walls remembered it. I moved deeper into the house. That's when the smell hit me. I smelled it. It wasn't blood or rot, something chemical. It was sharp and metallic. I followed the smell to the basement door, and it was closed, locked from the outside. I called for backup, then forced it open. The basement was dark except for a single light bulb swinging overhead. In the center of the room was a woman. She was alive, but barely. She was sitting on a wooden chair, her wrists zip tied behind her, and ankles bound. Her face was bruised, her lips cracked, and her eyes unfocused, but what froze me wasn't her condition. It was the walls. Every inch of them was covered in writing. Hundreds of sentences, all written in the same shaky handwriting. I stepped closer. They weren't threats or confessions, they were questions. They were things like, do you see it? Does it follow you when you close your eyes? Why does it know my name? Why does it whisper at night? And why does it want her? Over and over again, different variations, different sizes, some written so hard the pen had torn the drywall. I cut the woman free and she collapsed into me, shaking violently. I asked her where Granger was. She didn't answer me, but she kept whispering one word. She kept telling me that he was upstairs, so backup arrived and we cleared the house. We found Granger in the attic, hanging from a beam. His neck had been broken, face twisted into an expression I'll never forget. It wasn't fear nor pain, just recognition. Like he had seen something in his final moments that made everything make sense. The woman's name was Lydia Marsh. She was 32, local, and worked at a library. She had been missing for 3 days. When she finally regained enough strength to talk to us, she told us Granger had grabbed her in the parking lot after closing, dragged her into his car, and brought her to the basement. But here's the part that still keeps me up. She said he didn't hurt her, not physically. He just sat in front of her, hours at a time, staring at the wall and muttering to himself. Sometimes he'd ask her questions, not about her, but about her life. And he'd ask things such as, do you hear it breathing? Does it stand behind you too? Why does it want us to watch it? She said he barely slept, or barely ate. Just wrote on the walls and whispered to himself she couldn't see or hear. On the third night, he suddenly stood up and said, I understand now, and walked upstairs. She heard the attic ladder creak, and then a thud. That's when she started screaming. We searched Granger's computer and his phone and notebooks, but we found nothing. No manifesto, no delusions, no signs of psychosis, but we did find one thing. A folder on his desktop labeled The Visitor. It was in big bold letters and question mark. Inside were dozens of audio files, all recorded at night, all labeled with dates. The first were normal, just ambient room noises. But then, around 2 weeks before the kidnapping, the recordings changed. There was a sound, like a faint breathing, slow, wet, rhythmic, and every night after that, the breathing got louder, and it was like it was getting closer to him. On the final recording of that night on the file that he had, before he took Lydia, you could hear Granger whispering, "It's in the house," or something. Then the recording cuts off abruptly. We never found any evidence of a second person, or footsteps, or footprints, anything that considered forced entry or sign of anyone else living there. But here's the part I've never told anyone outside the department. 2 days after the case closed, I went back to that house alone out of curiosity. I don't know why, but maybe I just needed some closure. But the house was silent and it was empty. But when I walked into the basement, the air felt wrong. It was like heavy and charged. The writing was still on the walls, but something new had been added, and it was one single sentence that stood out to me, written in a different handwriting, written as if we'd sealed the house off. He wasn't asking the right questions. So I left immediately and I didn't tell anyone, and I haven't been back since. But because whatever Granger thought he saw or what he was doing, whatever he thought he was whispering to, I don't think it left with him. I think it stayed in the house, and I think it's still waiting for someone else there. But whoever it is, and wherever it is, I hope that I never come across it. I'll tell you straight. The first body didn't bother me. Not the way it should have, anyway. You work long enough in law enforcement, you learn to file certain things away. A dead drifter on an old logging road, sad, sure, but not unusual, not here. It was the second body that told me something was wrong in Brackenridge. And I don't mean wrong like a bad week or a rough case, I mean wrong like the air felt different, like the town was holding its breath. Colorado in the fall has this hollow feeling to it. The wind scrapes the dead leaves across the asphalt, and the sky turns this washed out gray that looks like it forgot how to be blue. I've lived through 23 autumns in Brackenridge, and every year it gets a little quieter. But this year, something felt off. It felt like before anything even happened. The first body showed up on October 3rd. Male, mid-40s, no identification, cut throat, eyes open. He was laid out in the middle of an abandoned logging road, like someone had placed him there deliberately. We treated it like a homicide, of course, but there was nothing to go on. No tracks, no blood trail, no signs of struggle, just a body in the middle of nowhere, staring at the sky. I should have paid more attention to that stare, but I did not. Not until the second body. It was 6:42 in the morning when the call came in. I remember the exact time because I was staring at my coffee, watching the steam rise like it was trying to warm me. Collins radioed in. Her voice was tight. "Sheriff, we're gonna want to see this yourself." I asked her where, and she said Old Briar House, and I swear to you, my stomach dropped. People around here don't go near that place, not because of ghost stories, those would be easier. It's because the Briar House is remembered. A century ago, the Briar House, they were wealthy, respected family, and they were found dead inside under some circumstances that nobody ever figured out. The house had been abandoned ever since, and kids used to dare each other to go inside. Teenagers drank there and partied there, but adults, we pretended like it didn't exist. But nobody goes alone, never. So I grabbed my coat and my holster for my sidearm, and I headed out. I remember the fog was clinging to the ground when I drove up, thick enough to blur the tree line into one dark mass. The Briar House sat at the end of a gravel road, its silhouette rising through the mist like a broken tooth. There was 2 patrol cars there already. Collins was standing on the porch, pale and stiff, and I asked her, "What do we got?" She didn't even answer right away. She just swallowed hard and said, "You should see for yourself." Inside, the air was cold enough to sting. I mean, there was dust everywhere. It was thick, undisturbed, except for footprints, these mysterious footprints leading deeper into the house. The body was in the dining room, and a woman. It was her mid-30s. She had clean clothes and clean hair, and there was absolutely no sign of struggle. But I swear her face, I've seen a lot of dead faces. Fear, pain, resignation, but this was entirely something else. Her eyes were wide and her pupils blown, staring at the ceiling like she had died in the middle of understanding something she shouldn't have. I asked Collins if there was any wounds. She told me there was no blood. She said no bruising, no defensive marks, or nothing. So I asked her if it was a heart attack, and she said maybe, but she told me to look at her hands. And I remember looking at her fingernails, and they were torn. They weren't broken, but torn, like she had clawed at something so violently that her nails got ripped off. But there was no marks on the floor, no marks on the walls, no marks anywhere on her skin. So I was like, what the hell is she clawing at? And of course, we couldn't find answers because we didn't know. So the coroner took the body away and we sealed the house up because we didn't want anybody going in there. But I did stay behind for a little while because something about the room felt wrong. It wasn't dangerous, just observed, like somebody was watching us. I walked around the dining room table, scanning the walls and the ceiling and the floorboards. Everything that was old, decayed, and untouched for decades. Except for I remember the smear on the far wall. Faint, vertical, but darker than the wood, and I leaned in. It wasn't blood or dirt, but something thicker. It had a metallic smell, and I touched it with my glove. It was sticky and fresh. So I called Collins over from the hallway and asked her, "Are you coming to see this?" She said yeah, because right then the house seemed to exhale. Just a subtle shift in the air. It was soft, settling of old wood, and for a moment I swear I heard something. It was a whisper. Not words, just breath. So later on, the autopsy came back that evening, and the cause of death was cardiac arrest. She had no drugs, no toxins, there was no trauma whatsoever. But the coroner added a note at the bottom that stuck with me. Unusual dilation of pupils, unusual tension in facial muscles. Subject appears to have died in a state of extreme psychological distress. And I remember saying extreme psychological distress, and I was asking myself from what? She had no identification. No missing persons report ever matched her. There was no fingerprints in any database. It was like she was a ghost who had died in a house that had been empty for a century. So that night I stayed really late at the office. Everyone else had gone home, and the only light was my desk lamp. I opened the file on the drifter. Throat cut, eyes open, laid out deliberately. Then the woman. She had no wounds, eyes open, expression frozen in terror. 2 homicides, no connection, except for the eyes. They were both staring, both wide, and both fixed on something only they had seen moments before their demise. I rubbed my temples out of frustration and confusion. I know I needed sleep, but I also needed answers. But then I heard something. I heard it. A soft rhythmic tapping, and I looked up. It was coming from the window, at least I swore it was. And I stood there for a moment with my hand on my holster, and I walked toward the window, and the tapping stopped. I waited, but nothing. I exhaled and gave a bit of a sigh, and then something moved in the reflection. It was a shape, but it was tall and thin and standing behind me. So I swung around as fast as I could with my gun drawn. But there was nothing. It was just an empty office and silence. I stood there a long time before lowering my gun. I told myself to get a grip, because I didn't believe it. Because for the first time since I was a kid, I felt watched. You know that feeling that you get when you're alone as a child and you feel like you're being watched in your bedroom at night? That's why we sleep with night lights. I felt that for the first time in my life. But the third body we found the next morning, and this time it wasn't a stranger. It was someone from our town. Someone everyone knew, someone who should have been safe but wasn't. And when I saw the body, and I saw the way it had been arranged, the eyes staring upward, the mouth frozen mid-scream, I realized something. The drifter was not the beginning. The woman in the Briar house wasn't even the beginning. This had been happening way longer than we realized. And whatever it was doing, and whatever it was trying to accomplish, it wasn't finished. Not even close. If you guys made it this far, stay tuned. I have part 2 of this coming eventually. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I really appreciate it. Thank you for making it this far, guys. Have a good one. I've been a patrol officer in Pine Hollow for 11 years. It's quiet, it's an Oregon town, population just under 4,000, surrounded by a forest thick enough to swallow sound. You get used to usual small town calls, noise complaints, drunk drivers, the occasional break-in. But last spring, something happened on Redwood Street that I still can't explain, and I've stopped trying to understand, because whatever it wasn't human. The first call came in on April 9th. A missing person report. A teenage boy named Evan Porter. He was 16 years old, didn't come home after school. His mother said he had texted her at 3:17 p.m. saying he was walking home. He lived only 6 blocks away. He never made it. We canvassed the area, talking to the neighbors, checked the school cameras, but there was nothing. It was like he had stepped off the sidewalk and vanished. But kids run away, kids hide, they lie. So we treated it like a runaway case. This was our first mistake. 3 days later, another call came in. This time, it was a woman in her late 20s. Her name was Hannah Cole. She didn't show up for her first shift at the diner. Her car was still in her driveway, her purse was inside, her phone was on the kitchen counter. The front door was locked, the back door was locked, no signs of forced entry whatsoever. But her shoes, the pair she wore every day, were missing. We pulled her phone records, and the last call she made was at 11:42 p.m., the night before. It was to 911. But the call never connected, just 1 second of static, then nothing. We checked the logs, there was no record of the call ever reaching dispatch. That was the first time I felt something was wrong. Not criminal but not accidental either, just wrong. Redwood Street is a quiet residential road. There's old houses, tall trees, lots of shade. Too much shade, personally. Even in the middle of the day, it feels dim, like the sun avoids it. I was assigned to patrol this area after Hannah disappeared. Just routine, just a presence. But on my second night, something happened that I still can't talk about without feeling sick. It was around 2:30 a.m. I was parked near the corner of Redwood and Outer. My engine was off, windows cracked, and the night was dead silent. There was no wind, no insects, nothing. Then I heard some footsteps. They were slow and heavy, coming from behind my cruiser. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. And I called out, "Pine Hollow PD, identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. I swept the light around, but I saw nothing. There was no people, no animals, and no movement. But the air felt wrong. It felt thick and charged, like the moment before lightning strikes and you could smell the rain in the air. So I got back in my car, locked the doors, and stayed there until sunrise. I didn't report it. I didn't know how to explain it, so I didn't really want to. A week later, we got another missing persons report, and this time it was a retired man named Franklin Dorsey. 72 years old, lived alone, quiet guy, walks his dog every morning at 6 a.m. His neighbor found the dog sitting on the porch, leash still attached, whining at the front door. But Dorsey was gone. Inside the house, everything was normal. Coffee pot was half full, TV remote on the couch, slippers by the bed, but the back door was wide open. It wasn't broken or forced, it was just open. In the porch, right outside the door, was a single footprint. It was bare, human, but wrong. The toes were too long, it was too arched and too high, and the shape was too narrow, like someone had stretched a human foot into something else entirely. We sent it to the lab out of curiosity, and they sent it back with a note, not a match to any unknown or any known human morphology. That was the moment I realized we weren't dealing with a person. The disappearances kept happening, once every 4 to 6 days, always on or near Redwood Street. Always without a trace. No forced entry, no struggle, and no witnesses. Just people gone. We increased patrols. We set up cameras, ran night surveillance. Nothing helped, but the stranger part wasn't the disappearances. It was the sound. Residents started reporting hearing something at night. It wasn't screams or footsteps, just breathing. They said it was always slow, deep, and wet, like something enormous was inhaling right outside their windows. Kind of weird. We checked every report, every time, but there was nothing there. But the people who heard it all described the same thing. It sounded like something was waiting. Turning point came on May 2nd. I was patrolling Redwood Street around 1:15 a.m. when I saw movement near the old Miller house. The place had been abandoned for years. It was peeling paint, boarded windows, overgrown yard, but the front door was wide open, just slightly. Just enough to see the darkness inside. I called within and approached slowly and announced myself, but there was no response. I pushed the door open and the smell hit me first. It wasn't rot or mold, just something metallic, like blood but sharper. The living room was empty and dust was everywhere. There was no footprints, but the hallway, it was wrong. The walls were covered in scratches, long deep gouges, something high up near the ceiling, too high for any person to reach. So I followed the scratches back to the back room, and there's where I found it, a pile of clothing neatly folded. stacked on the floor. There was men's clothes, women's clothes, children's clothes of all different styles and sizes, all belonging to the people that were missing. I recognized Evan's backpack, Hannah's jacket, and Dorsey's flannel shirt, but no bodies, no blood, just their clothes. And on the wall above the pile, written in something dark and smeared, "It doesn't need them anymore." I backed out of the house, called for backup, and secured the scene. But the whole time I felt something watching me, not from the house, but from the trees, from the dark between them, from the places the light could not reach. We never found the missing, not one of them. The case is still open and still active. It's still unfortunately unsolved, but the Redwood Street is empty now. People moved away, houses sold for pennies, and some just abandoned. And at night, when the wind dies and the forest goes still, you can hear it again. That breathing. It's slow and deep and patient. It's like it's waiting. For what it's waiting for, I don't know. But I know this: whatever took those people, it's still out there, and it's not finished. Whoever you are, I hope that we never meet.